For years, it was the question nobody could shake. Why did Edd China really leave Wheeler Dealers? On the surface, the official explanation was neatly packaged: creative differences, a natural evolution, a mutual parting of ways. But to fans who had followed the show since its humble beginnings, the answer felt hollow, like a line rehearsed behind a studio door. Something was missing. Something didn't fit. The show was at its peak, the chemistry was still magnetic, the format beloved. So, why did one half of the duo suddenly vanish? For 8 long years, that mystery sat heavy in the hearts of viewers. Whispers circled, conspiracies flourished. But the man at the center of it all remained silent, until now. In a quiet, easily missed interview, no headlines, no scandal. Edd China finally broke his silence. And what he revealed was exactly what many had feared. This wasn't just a scheduling conflict or a creative decision. It was something deeper, something personal, something painful. But to understand why Edd China walked away, we need to go back not just to the end, but to the very beginning. When Wheeler Dealers premiered in 2003, it didn't arrive with fanfare or glitter. It was modest, almost reluctant to grab attention. A British car show airing on the then niche Discovery real-time channel, fronted by 2 men who seemed more like neighbors from down the street than TV stars. Mike Brewer brought the energy. Fast-talking, wheeling and dealing car trader with a sharp eye for bargains and an endless supply of charm. Edd China was the polar opposite: towering, soft-spoken, and deeply methodical. Where Mike barked excitement, Edd whispered explanations. He didn't just repair cars, he taught. Every socket wrench turn came with context, every greasy job infused with clarity. The show's original format was unpretentious. Mike bought an old banger, Edd fixed it up, and together they sold it for profit. No high-octane stunts, no celebrity guests, just pure mechanical storytelling. And yet, that simplicity was its strength. The workshop wasn't glamorous. You could hear the floorboards creak under Edd's boots. The tools weren't pristine. Sometimes they looked older than the cars being worked on, but this raw, unscripted honesty created something rare: trust. It didn't matter if you were a gearhead or a weekend tinkerer, Wheeler Dealers welcomed you in. In an age where reality TV was becoming increasingly staged, dramatic, and product-driven, Wheeler Dealers stood out by refusing to play that game. There were no brought to you by graphics, no forced drama. Just 2 men working through real problems, often struggling, sometimes failing, but always teaching. And yet, what fans didn't see in those early years was the fragility behind the scenes. The show began with a tiny crew: Mike, Edd, a cameraman, a sound guy, and a couple of producers from a little-known UK company called Attaboy TV. They filmed in tight quarters, with no guarantee they'd get another season, but they did, and then another and another. And before long, Wheeler Dealers wasn't just a cult favorite, it was a phenomenon. Syndicated in over 200 countries, millions of viewers per episode. And in a world increasingly obsessed with virality and fast content, Wheeler Dealers had pulled off the impossible: global success without sacrificing its identity. But fame is a double-edged spanner. As the show grew, so did expectations: bigger budgets, bigger markets, more pressure. With every new territory came new demands. And gradually, the simplicity that made the show so endearing became a liability, at least in the eyes of the network. Viewers started to notice subtle changes. Edd's repair segments were getting shorter. His explanations were being trimmed. The once meaty workshop sequences were now slick montages set to upbeat music. It was still entertaining, but something felt different, off. Online forums lit up. Longtime fans exchanged observations. Why doesn't Edd explain the fixes like he used to? Did anyone else notice they skipped over the entire brake system replacement? Is this show being Americanized? And they were right to ask. Because behind the curtain, tensions were rising. Discoveries, seeing the show's massive U.S. potential, wanted a more marketable product. Their U.S. division Velocity Channel began making their presence felt. Executives saw Wheeler Dealers not as an educational show, but as a content engine. And what sells? Speed, style, shine. Edd's in-depth tutorials were, to them, a drag on pacing, a risk to viewer retention. Soon, decisions were being made quietly, gradually, but with massive consequences. Edd was asked to simplify, cut corners, remove complexity, turn detailed fixes into broad strokes. Instead of showing how to rebuild a carburetor, just say it's fixed and move on. Instead of showing how a gearbox is dismantled, just cut to the before and after and add a joke. But for Edd China, that was the red line. He once said, "I never wanted to be a TV presenter. I wanted to be a mechanic who could show people how things work." That was his core, his mission. And when that began to erode, so did his role on the show. But he didn't leave right away. He fought, quietly, persistently. He pushed back on changes. Advocated for longer repair segments, fought to preserve the technical depth that had built the show's identity. But each season brought more resistance, more metrics, more network notes. Privately, he knew the battle was already lost. He tried to hold on anyway. When Wheeler Dealers moved its production from Attaboy TV in the UK to Discovery Studios in California, Edd's worst fears were confirmed. The British soul of the show, the modest workshop, the gritty charm, the emphasis on learning was being repackaged for American audiences. It was the end of an era. In a farewell video posted on YouTube just under 10 minutes long, Edd announced his departure. No flashy editing, no dramatic music, just Edd sitting in his own garage, explaining why he was walking away. His words were calm, measured, but unmistakably heavy. The U.S. producers, he said, wanted to significantly reduce the workshop content, the very part of the show he considered vital. The show, he explained, would become something he couldn't support. "I wouldn't be doing it properly," he said. "I'd be bodging it. And bodging it is not an option." And just like that, one half of Wheeler Dealers was gone. The reaction from fans was immediate and explosive. Millions watched the video within days. Comment sections filled with heartbreak and confusion. Across Reddit, Facebook, car forums, and YouTube, one sentiment echoed again and again: "Thank you for standing by your principles." But with that admiration came another wave of anger. And much of it was aimed at Mike Brewer. People demanded explanations. Was Mike complicit? Did he back the network's changes? Did he push it out? Mike denied it. He posted responses, said he was devastated by Edd's departure, that it wasn't his call, that he had no power to stop the format change. He called Edd his brother, said he wished things could have been different. Edd, ever the gentleman, tried to calm the storm. In a follow-up message, he explicitly asked fans not to blame Mike, but the damage was done. For a while, it became Wheeler Dealers versus Wheeler Dealers. Fans split into factions. YouTube reaction videos dissected every interview, every sentence. Media outlets covered the story like a scandal. And through it all, two men who had once shared 13 years of chemistry didn't appear side by side ever again, not in a single interview, not in a podcast. Not even in a photograph. The silence between them was louder than any argument could have been. People kept asking the same question: if there was no fallout, no feud, then why the silence? It wasn't just absence. It was total disconnection, no subtle Instagram likes. No behind-the-scenes shots, no fan conventions or nostalgic reunions, nothing. For two people who had built something as enduring as Wheeler Dealers, their public separation was chilling in its completeness. Even their interviews changed. Mike's answers became more rehearsed. He repeated the same defenses. The show had to evolve. Edd made his choice. We're still mates, but fans could sense something behind the words. There was tension in his tone, sometimes irritation, other times weariness. **EDD, on the other hand, grew more measured. His tone more careful, his words softer but more distant. He never criticized Mike directly, never blamed him. But when asked about wheeler dealers, his eyes often drifted. He paused longer, thought harder. He was protecting something or someone. And that silence became part of the mystery. Forums filled with speculation. Some believed the silence was a legal issue in DAs, contracts, non-disparagement clauses. Others thought it was emotional, that years of quiet resentment had built up, and neither man wanted to reopen old wounds. And some those who had watched the show from the beginning believed something else entirely. That this wasn't a personal falling out, it was the slow death of something both men had loved. But only one had been willing to let go of. For Edd China, leaving wasn't a career move, it was a moral one. And in the years that followed, he didn't chase television fame. He didn't jump into a new network deal or land on a rival show. He didn't even try to capitalize on the fan momentum. Instead, he vanished. At least for a while. When he returned, it was on his terms, a self-produced YouTube series called Edd China's Workshop Diaries. It was the opposite of everything wheeler dealers had become. No production crew, no sponsors, no network constraints. Just Edd in a modest garage, taking his time. Each episode focused on real repairs. Not flashy flips, not speed builds, just honest, intricate mechanical work. He'd spend entire episodes on a single fix, rebuilding a master cylinder, adjusting fuel mixtures, rethinking classic suspension setups. The pacing was slow. Sometimes deliberately so. There were no big reveals. No car auctions, no wheeling. Just dealing, and yet the audience came, not in millions, but in hundreds of thousands. Diehards, tinkerers, people who didn't care about the price tag on a car but cared about how it worked. People who remembered the wheeler dealers that once was and found its soul again in Edd's quiet rebellion. Every bolt he torqued was a message. Every long-winded explanation a statement. This is how it should be, and yet, while Edd quietly rebuilt his own corner of the internet, wheeler dealers kept rolling. Mike Brewer pressed on. A new co-host and stage was introduced. The format updated. The visuals got sharper. The workshop moved again. The cars got flashier. The storytelling faster. And to its credit, the show worked. And Stade was skilled, charismatic, and had chemistry with Mike. They kept the spirit alive as best they could. And after Mark Elvis Priestley stepped in, bringing his own blend of expertise and TV presence. For many viewers, the show was still informative. Still entertaining, but it was never quite the same. Beneath every episode's comment section, one phrase appeared like clockwork: still miss it. Or, it's good, but not what it used to be. The ghost of Edd China haunted the brand not out of malice, but because he had represented something pure. His departure had exposed something uncomfortable, that wheeler dealers, in its earliest form, had been a kind of rare truth in television. And once that truth was compromised, it couldn't be fully recovered. Mike tried to steer the ship forward. He addressed the past on occasion, usually with diplomacy. But every attempt seemed to deepen the divide. Some fans moved on, some never did. The weirdest part. Through all of it, the network never tried to bring it back, not even as a guest. Not for a one-off reunion, not even for a retrospective. The very man who helped launch the franchise into the stratosphere was quietly erased from its future, and yet he never disappeared. At car shows, fans still lined up to see him. To shake his hand, to thank him, they'd bring up specific repairs. He'd explained 10 years ago repairs they'd replicated on their own cars. He was more than a presenter. He had become a mentor to an entire generation of DIY mechanics. He spoke at engineering summits, worked on electric conversions, patented Inventions, even developed a bizarre but brilliant motorized office chair, a true Edd China classic. Everything he touched carried the same spirit, innovation, integrity, and curiosity, and through all of it, he rarely mentioned wheeler dealers. Not because he resented it, but because he had already made peace with his choice. That peace, however, was not shared by his audience. And then, 8 years later, he spoke. It wasn't a press conference, not a headline-grabbing interview. Just a podcast, casual, conversational, but what he said hit harder than anything before. He confessed that walking away had been one of the hardest decisions of his life, that he didn't want to leave, that he loved the show, still did, but in those final seasons, he no longer recognized himself. He was cutting corners, faking enthusiasm, delivering half-answers when he wanted to dive deep. He said, "I hated the version of myself I was becoming," and in that moment, everything clicked. He hadn't just walked away from a show. He'd walked away from a version of himself that had stopped telling the truth. He confirmed that the show had lost its focus, that network executives wanted faster edits, less detail, and more surface-level fixes, that workshop segments were being shaved down to slivers, that he had tried to push back, tried to preserve what mattered. But the pressure became unbearable, and so he left, not because he wanted to, but because staying would have meant compromising the thing that had always mattered most to him: honesty. When the clip hit the internet, fans went into overdrive. Old debates reignited. Comment sections exploded. It was vindication. After all this time, Ed had confirmed what everyone had felt but couldn't prove. It had never been about egos or money. It had been about values. And in leaving, Edd China had done something almost unheard of in modern television. He had chosen integrity over fame. Edd single quotes as confession didn't come with blame. There were no outbursts, no villains named. That wasn't his way. But in its own quiet tone, it said more than a dozen exposes could. He wasn't bitter. He was relieved. For the first time in nearly a decade, he no longer had to pretend he was okay with the path the show had taken. He didn't need to tiptoe around the truth, and most importantly, he could finally talk about why it had all slipped away. But what surprised many wasn't just the clarity of his words, it was the timing. Why now? Why after 8 years of measured silence? Maybe it was because enough time had passed, maybe the dust had finally settled. Or maybe, and this feels most likely, he saw that people still cared. That even after all this time, fans hadn't moved on. They were still waiting, still hoping, still trying to understand, because Wheeler Dealers, for many, wasn't just a car show. It was something else. Something rarer. It was about seeing problems and working through them, about patience, about craftsmanship, and in an era defined by speed, shortcuts, and quick rewards, it was a reminder that some things are worth doing slowly and properly. When it left, the show may have continued, but that message got lost. Not because Mike or his new co-hosts weren't talented, they were, but because the center had shifted. The original soul of Wheeler Dealers had always been the workshop. The moment the camera stopped lingering on the process, on the how and why, was the moment it started becoming just another show about cars. That shift may have earned new viewers, but it also left others behind. Online, the divide is still visible. Search any Wheeler Dealers episode and you'll see the split. Great job, but I miss the in-depth repairs. Still wish it was here. Mike's good, but it's not the same. These aren't casual observations, they're emotional check-ins. Fans who feel like they lost something, not just a presenter, but a kind of relationship. A connection built not through hype, but through authenticity. There's an entire generation of home mechanics who learned their first oil change from Edd, who watched him explain gearbox ratios or brake bleeding procedures with calm, deliberate care, who followed along step by step in cold garages with second-hand tools, trusting that if it could do it, so could they. That kind of mentorship doesn't vanish just because a new presenter arrives, and Edd didn't abandon that community. If anything, he doubled down. Workshop diaries, though slower in pace and reach, has become a kind of haven. It's unpolished, sometimes messy, but deeply personal. And in many ways, it's a quiet continuation of what wheeler dealers used to be. There are no dramatic hooks. No countdowns, no contrived suspense, just process. Just presence, and through that, Edd has built something rare, trust that lasts. Meanwhile, Mike Brewer has continued to evolve. He's hosted special episodes, embraced electric vehicles, and found new rhythms with new co-hosts. From Ann Anstade to Elvis Presley, each era has brought something different. The show has adapted, it's tried to stay relevant. But there's a shadow hanging over all of it, and that shadow isn't spiteful. It's nostalgic. Every new episode invites comparison. Every shiny new format reminds viewers of the grit that used to be there. Even when the show succeeds, and it often does, it succeeds differently. The deeper message isn't gone. It's just harder to find. And maybe that's what fans are really mourning, not Edd China the person, but what he represented. In today's television landscape, where most shows chase engagement metrics and retention curves, Wheeler Dealers in its prime was a kind of anomaly. It trusted the audience to pay attention, to follow complex ideas, to care about bolts and bearings, not just horsepower and paint jobs. And Edd's refusal to dilute that was revolutionary, not in a loud, disruptive way, but in the soft resistance of saying no to convenience. No to shortcuts, no to cheapening the lesson, no to pretending that depth was expendable. In walking away, Edd did something few in his position ever do. He drew a line. And he stuck to it. The result? A man respected not just for his knowledge but for his character. Even fans who stopped watching Wheeler Dealers continued to follow Edd, not out of loyalty but out of shared values. He had become a kind of symbol, one of those rare public figures who didn't let fame distort their principles. There are moments in media when a choice becomes bigger than itself, when one person's decision resonates far beyond the screen. Edd's departure was one of those moments. It said to every viewer, "You're not crazy for noticing things feel different. You're not wrong for missing what this show used to be. And you're not alone in wanting more than just entertainment." For a long time, that message had no voice. Just silence, speculation, hope. Now it is a name again, Edd China, and whether he meant to or not, by speaking out after 8 years, he rekindled the spark that made the show special in the first place. Not because he burned bridges, but because he lit a torch. But what about Mike Brewer? For all the scrutiny he endured, the truth is more complicated than most fans want to believe. Yes, he stayed. Yes, he adapted, and yes, he defended the direction the show took, but it would be dishonest to say he wasn't affected. You don't spend 13 years building something beside someone and simply shrug off their departure. Mike may have embraced the show's evolution, but that doesn't mean he welcomed the backlash. The tweets, the hate mail, the long, accusatory threads that painted him as the villain of a story he may not have even controlled, and for every PR statement and cheerful Instagram post, there were moments where the mask slipped just a bit. In interviews, his tone sometimes tightened when Edd's name came up. His words grew clipped, not angry, not resentful, but wounded. There's a sadness there buried beneath the showman's grin, because no matter how hard Mike tried to steer the ship forward, the fans had already chosen their symbol. And it wasn't him. It's not that people turned on Mike because they stopped liking him, it's that they had to pick a side. And the side that said no to compromise felt nobler, cleaner, safer, but what fans often forget is that Mike didn't control the corporate levers. He didn't green light the velocity shift. He didn't design the budget cuts or the format edits. He was the face, but not the hand behind the changes, and perhaps that's the tragedy of it all. To men who once complemented each other perfectly, now locked in a silence neither seems willing or able to break, they haven't spoken publicly. In over 8 years, not even in passing, no reunion show. No joint appearance, no nostalgic nod. Just silence, and in that silence, fans hear everything, * they fill in the gaps, construct narratives. Some imagine betrayal, others imagine quiet, heartbreak. But all of them imagine something because deep down, no one wants to believe that a partnership that worked so beautifully on screen could simply vanish without a trace. Without a fight, without even a goodbye, and maybe that's what makes this story linger. It's unfinished. * even now, years later, the question still hangs in the air like exhaust from an idling engine. Could they ever reunite? Would they? What would it take? There's no clear answer. Edd has moved on. He's building at his own pace, in his own garage, on his own terms. Mike, too, has pushed ahead, rebuilding the brand, steering it into new formats, new geographies, new tech, and yet, that missing link remains. Not a person, a feeling, * a feeling that something real once existed here. That two people built a show based on curiosity, honesty, and craftsmanship. And that somewhere along the road, television's hunger for polish and speed stripped away the parts that made it whole. In many ways, Edd China became more than a presenter. He became a kind of quiet revolutionary in an industry addicted to compromise. By walking away, he said, what so many in entertainment are too afraid to say out loud. If you remove the substance, the show isn't worth saving. That message didn't just resonate with mechanics. It resonated with teachers, artists, engineers, YouTubers, coders, anyone who's ever had to choose between doing it right and doing it fast. And the longer it stayed away from mainstream television, the louder that message echoed. He wasn't just preserving his principles, he was preserving possibility, * the possibility that shows could still be made with care, that viewers still wanted depth, that slow wasn't boring, that knowledge was power, not filler, and that walking away from the spotlight doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it means freedom. You see it in his workshop diaries, in the way he pauses to explain the geometry of suspension, in the way he measures tolerances with obsessive precision, in the way he still, even now, talks to the camera like you're in the garage with him, not watching from a distance. He hasn't changed, * and maybe that's what gives fans hope. Because if Edd can hold the line in his little corner of YouTube, then maybe not today, not this year, but someday, the call will come, a reunion, a restoration, one final collaboration. Not for ratings, not for nostalgia, but for closure. And if that day ever comes, it won't be about fixing a car. It'll be about fixing something far rarer, a story, a friendship, a legacy. Until then, we're left with what it gave us. And that's not nothing. It's a blueprint for doing things right, for knowing when to say no, for staying curious, staying stubborn, and staying true to the person you were before the cameras ever rolled. And that's why Edd China didn't just leave wheeler dealers, he left a mark. One that still lingers in every skipped repair, every rushed edit, and every fan who hears a torque wrench click and remembers a different time, a better time. So now we ask you, was Edd China right to walk away from the biggest opportunity of his career? Or did television lose something it may never get back? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. And as always, keep those spanners spinning.